Engineers begged NASA to delay the launch the night before Challenger took off. They were aware that the cold would cause issues. The bosses didn't care about them. Some engineers told their wives, "It's going to blow up." Many people watched live on TV the next morning as 7 men died. NASA knew about issues in 1977. In any case, they decided to keep flying. The terrible event wasn't a surprise. This is the whole truth that they tried to hide. The Apollo missions were over, and NASA had a new goal. They wanted to make a space shuttle that could go to space more than once. This would make getting to orbit cheaper and faster. They made the program public in 1972. Scientists called it a space truck because it was strong enough to regularly transport humans and satellites. They also thought that the shuttle would help build a space station in the future and make going to space seem normal, even boring. Work on the first shuttle, Columbia, finally ended on April 12, 1981. It had taken years of hard work. Something big happened. Columbia was the first spaceship to make it through the trip, come back and be used again. NASA said the space shuttle was ready for real trips after 4 test flights. Some people were excited about what it could do by the time it flew regularly in 1982. Those first few years of the shuttle program were full of wins. SpaceX did science tests, sent satellites into space, and even helped break down barriers here on Earth. American Sally Ride was the first woman to go into space. Bluford was the first African American to go into space. It was important to NASA that people around the world saw the shuttle as a strong and trusted machine. Congress was told that the shuttle would fly up to 24 times a year, even though this had not been fully tried in space. Being successful early on gave NASA's leaders more confidence, maybe too much confidence. They started to take launches for granted, even though technology problems should have made them more careful. It became even more important to keep up the pace. The program was going full speed by 1985. NASA tried 9 shuttle flights in 1 year, which was the most they had ever done in a single year. In the background, though, things were getting worse. Every shuttle needed a lot of difficult repairs, and engineers had to work non-stop to keep up. There were problems with every mission right before it took off, but the need to launch on time made it harder to slow down and fix everything right. A lot of the time, managers cared more about meeting goals than making sure everything was perfect. In addition, NASA wanted people to keep being excited about space travel. They made special shows to keep the attention on them. The Teacher in Space project was one of the best ones. In 1984, Ronald Reagan, then president, said that a regular school teacher would be taking the shuttle. Over 11,000 teachers wanted to be the first ones to get the job. NASA picked elementary school teacher Christa McAuliffe in 1985. She worked out with the pilots and planned to teach classes from space that would be shown in American schools all over the country. People were interested in Christa's story. Being a teacher in space was a great idea that everyone liked. NASA loved it because it got them a lot of attention and showed that space travel was becoming normal. While people smiled and cheered, though, many experts at NASA were getting tense. With each launch, time was running out. The maintenance windows got smaller. Some technical problems weren't fixed, but managers started acting like everything was fine because similar problems had happened on other planes. It was called normalizing deviance when people thought this way. In other words, things that were dangerous didn't seem so dangerous anymore because they hadn't led to a disaster. One of the biggest threats, though, was inside the solid rocket engines of the shuttle. To keep the different parts together, rubber O-rings were used to join them together. The concept was easy. The exhaust from the boosters would heat the O-rings, which would then expand and fill in any small holes. But tests done in 1981 and 1982 showed a worrying sign. It happened that the O-rings didn't always fit right. It was possible for hot gases to leak through the joints, leaving soot lines where there should have been no airflow. Soot was found between 2 O-rings in August 1984, after only 1 trip. In other words, the first cover had not worked. In that case, only the second O-ring ended up saving the mission. It made things very clear. Nobody believed the boosters were safe. Things had gotten worse by 1985. The mission in January of that year took place on a cold day. It looked like the O-rings in both blowers were wearing down. Actually, almost every shuttle trip that year had some kind of O-ring damage. Even the spare O-ring was broken on 1 trip. Morton Thiokol, the company that made the boosters, sent out a lot of worried engineers. 3 of their best engineers, Roger Boisjoli, Alan MacDonald, and others, worked hard to make changes. They offered better designs, and even adding a 3rd O-ring to make it safer. The business started making better boosts, but they wouldn't be ready for a while. Old boosters were still being used at the same time. Even though everyone knew there was a problem, they thought it was safe to keep going because it had worked in the past. Because flights had been through O-ring loss before, managers began to think they would always be able to make it. A lot of experts didn't agree. A letter from Roger Boisjoli even said that lives would be lost if nothing was done. It was a disaster waiting to happen, but most people didn't listen to him. People in charge at NASA were used to small problems, and thought that since nothing bad had happened yet, nothing bad would happen either. Every task that went well made them feel better about themselves. In their minds, the risk was okay. It became very hard for engineers and managers to talk to each other. The risk was getting worse, but not many people at the top paid attention. NASA got ready for Challenger's next mission, STS-51L, as 1985 came to a close. A lot of people were going to be there. 7 individuals were set to fly. These people were Commander Dick Scobie, pilot Michael J. Smith, and mission experts Ronald McNair, Judith Resnick, and Ellison Onizuka. Gregory Jarvis and a school teacher named Christa McAuliffe, 2 payload experts, were also going to join. Because of Christa, this project was unique. Millions of school kids were ready to watch her lessons live from space because she was going to be the first citizen teacher there. NASA had never seen anything like this before. There were important goals for the mission. Along with the Teacher in Space program, Challenger was meant to look at Halley's Comet and put in place a $100 million communication satellite. The Challenger would make its 10th trip and the 25th mission of the Shuttle program. The start date was supposed to be January 22, 1986, but things didn't go as planned. Everything moved later than planned because of delays from the last shuttle flight. More delays were made because of bad weather and technology problems. The crew of the Challenger had to get ready more than once, but the launch was cancelled at the last minute. When the launch was finally moved to January 28, it was the 7th time that it had been tried. Even though it was annoying, the pilots were patient during the delays. When asked, they smiled and said they believed NASA would put safety first. Of course, none of them knew how scared some engineers were about the weather they would be working in. Unusual cold weather hit Florida the night before the flight. Around Kennedy Space Center, it was cold at midnight. An ice sheet formed on the launch pad. A shuttle had never taken off on a day that was so cold. A weather report said that the morning would be about 30 degrees Fahrenheit. The engineers at Morton Theological quickly became worried. They knew that when it got cold, the shuttle's rubber O-rings might stiffen up. The cover might not be good enough, so there could be a leak. They could destroy the whole shuttle if there was a leak. The techs ran to let everyone know. They held talks and told their bosses that it would be dangerous to launch in that much cold weather. Some people said no very strongly, like Roger Boisjoli and Bob Ebeling. They had seen O-rings have trouble even at 53 degrees. It got colder now. Worried that the rubber would stiffen up like plastic and not be able to close all the way when the rocket engines started up. A late-night call was set up by NASA to talk about it. 2 NASA officials from Florida and Alabama talked with engineers from Theocol. The team from Boisjoli showed papers and charts and issued strong warnings. They asked for a delay. They were aware that it would make them look bad. They understood that it would make a lot of people angry. They thought it was safer to be late than to risk lives, though NASA's leaders were not pleased. They were fed up with being late. Multiple times, Challenger's launch had been pushed back. The stress was getting worse. Some government leaders, like Lawrence Malloy, were angry. He got so angry that he asked Theocol if they should wait until April. NASA said that the engineers' proof wasn't strong enough. They pointed out that the shuttles had lived through times when the O-rings had worn down. The people in charge at Theocol felt stuck. Astronauts and their builders. They told their engineers to think about the bigger picture and act like managers, which was a mistake that would come back to bite them. The sounds that were warning got softer. Executives at Theocol changed their minds because of the pressure. They did not have any problems with the launch, according to NASA. Many people, including Boisjoli, were very sad. One of the engineers was so scared that he told his wife, "It's going to blow up." But NASA decided it was safe to go the next morning, even though it was still very cold and there was ice on the launch pad. The ice was thought to be dangerous, but not dangerous enough to stop the plan. So the timer kept going. The men got on the shuttle around 11:30 a.m. They got ready in their flight suits and smiled for the cameras. They were warned the night before, but no one told them about it. A big crowd watched the launch. It was packed with families of the crew and Christa McAuliffe's students, who were all excited to see their teacher become the first person from Earth to go into space. 100 million school kids in the US watched live on TV, thrilled to see history being made. The Challenger took off at 11:38 a.m. It slowly rose into the sky with flames and smoke coming from the engines. There was cheering. Everything looked great from the ground up, but if you paid close attention, you could see that the right rocket was letting out small puffs of smoke almost right away. That meant the O-ring, the rubber seal, wasn't working right. It wasn't seen in time. The shuttle kept going up. It hit a point of high air pressure called max Q after about a minute of flight. It still looked good. The pilots were told by mission control that they could make the engines run faster. "Roger, go at throttle up," the leader, Dick Scobie, said in a calm voice. Those were the last words anyone heard from Challenger. A bright flash lit up the sky 73 seconds after launch. It blew up with fire and smoke. The space shuttle broke up in the air. People who were watching were shocked. A lot of trash fell into the ocean. The fireball was fed by the big orange fuel tank that had burst. The room at mission control was very quiet. Then a quiet voice said something major went wrong. From the shuttle there were no more signs. It took weeks to figure out what came about in those 73 seconds. People at first thought the shuttle had blown up like a bomb. That wasn't really true though. It broke apart in real life. The real trouble began when the rocket took off. The O-ring on the right booster was stiff because it was cold, so it couldn't seal properly. A hole let hot gas escape. Burnt stuff filled the hole and kept things going for a short time. But the harm was already done. As Challenger went up, it ran into strong winds high in the sky. The shaking broke the booster's plug. There was a small flame on the rocket at 64 seconds. The flame got hotter and hotter until it started to melt into the gas tank. The booster came away at 73 seconds and hit the tank. The shuttle broke up into many pieces. It was going almost twice as fast as sound. In the cold air, the nose, tail, and wings all broke off. It looked like an explosion to people who saw it. The shuttle didn't blow up all at once. Though, the fuel tank blew up and the shuttle broke up into bits. The two rocket boosters kept getting away from the rocket. They couldn't hurt anyone, so ground teams had to destroy them. "We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded," a voice finally said in mission control. Then there was panic and quiet. There was nothing they could do. There were right-away steps taken for an emergency. The doors were locked and the data was safe. Parts of the shuttle were falling into the water about 20 miles off the coast of Florida. Rescue teams rushed out to the scene. What a sad question about the pilots. The crew house had broken off and was still in the air. It didn't catch fire. It went up even higher to about 65,000 feet. And then it started to fall again. The cabin was built to last and it mostly stayed together. The astronauts were being violently shaken inside. After the shuttle broke up though, it turned out that some of them were still living. 3 emergency air packs were manually turned on. Pilot Mike Smith and 2 other people had turned theirs on. He might have tried to get back in charge. It had to be really scary. There was no electricity in the house. It dropped quickly and the air pressure dropped. So the crew probably passed out before it hit the water. It was going more than 200 miles per hour when it fell. It was too dangerous to live through the explosion. NASA said they didn't know for sure when the group died. They were not killed when the shuttle broke up. The last crash did. At that point in the trip there was no way to get away. One of the hardest things to understand about the accident was that NASA didn't talk about it much in public. People on Earth were shocked. As the teacher went into space, this was meant to be a happy moment. A lot of kids watched a disaster live on TV instead. Families that had come to celebrate were now sad. Some of the Challenger fell into the sea at the Kennedy Space Center. Nothing but tears and quiet could be heard in mission control. Every TV network stopped what they were doing to show the blast, which they did over and over again. In front of everyone, it was the first time an American spaceship had been lost in flight. All shuttle flights were stopped by NASA that afternoon. President Ronald Reagan changed the time of a big speech he was going to give to Congress so he could address the whole country from the Oval Office. He made the kids feel better and thanked the scientists. At the end, he read a song that talked about touching the face of God. During that sad time, his words gave people some hope. 3 days after the death, there was a memorial at Houston's NASA Johnson Space Center. Reagan and the First Lady were there, standing with the crew's families and NASA employees. It was cold and cloudy outside. Military jets flew over in the shape of a missing man to honor the pilots who died. Reagan spoke once more. He said that we have to keep trying even if we fail sometimes when we try to reach the stars. His words showed how much pain and courage people were feeling. Everyone wanted to know what happened after the blast. After a few days, Reagan set up a special group to look into what happened. It was called the Rogers Commission, and William P. Rogers, who used to be Secretary of State, was in charge of it. Famous people were in the group, such as Neil Armstrong, who was the first person to walk on the moon, General Chuck Yeager, pilot Sally Ride, and the famous scientist Richard Feynman. No one trusted NASA, to be fair, so they didn't look into the crash itself. The Rogers Commission then took charge. There were different groups that worked on different parts of the problem and talked to more than 160 people. Some looked at how the booster was made. Some people looked at how NASA makes decisions. One group, led by Sally Ride, looked at how hard it was to stay on track for the launch. When Richard Feynman did a simple demo on live TV, it was a big deal. He put some of the same rubber that was used to make the O-rings in a glass of cold water. He then squeezed it to show how cold it made it stiff. It was very clear from that little experiment why the O-ring didn't work. Later, Feynman wrote an extra section for the final report that blamed NASA for not listening to the warnings and putting too much trust in a system that wasn't as safe as they thought it was. The cause of the explosion became clear as the study went on. Hot gas had leaked past the O-rings and set off the explosion. It wasn't the gas tank or any other part. Only the O-rings. It was even worse because it was cold. The commission didn't end there, though. They learned that NASA had known about the fault with the O-rings since 1977. Morton Thiokol, the company that made the rockets, also knew. They didn't fix the style, though. They took the risk even though they didn't fully understand it. Even worse, Thiokol engineers begged to put off the launch the night before because it was too cold. And yet their advice never got to the top leaders at NASA. Because they were under a lot of pressure to stay on track, mid-level managers gave the order. The commission said that NASA couldn't talk to them. The launch could have been stopped if the right people had heard those shouts. A few people thought that the White House had pushed NASA to launch on time for Reagan's speech. But there was no proof of that found during the probe. Reagan's draft speech didn't say much about the goal. The stress seemed to come mostly from inside NASA. They were trying to do what they said they would do. The O-rings weren't the only thing the commission blamed in its final report. It put the blame on everything at NASA. They came up with 9 big ideas. In the beginning, they said that the shuttle joints needed to be changed. They also told NASA to change how it ran the program. The engineers had to take their worries to the top. They considered making a new office for safety that would report directly to the administrator of NASA. They also said that pilots should have a say in important choices because they were putting their lives at risk. The experts told NASA that night that the Challenger shouldn't have taken off. It could have been put off for days or weeks until it got warmer. The O-rings would not have broken easily. It would have been safe for the shuttle to fly and come back. Christa McAuliffe was going to go back to class. People might have made fun of NASA for another delay, but the accident would not have happened. There was a way to fix the O-ring problem without drawing attention to it. That did not happen, though. It was very important for people at NASA to stay on track. It's easy for small mistakes to turn dangerous when time is more important than safety. People who knew there were risks were not taken into account. Some people asked about business and politics as well. With help from the government, Morton Thiokol got the booster deal. There were people who thought the style was picked because it was less expensive, even though it wasn't the best. Even though there was no proof of wrongdoing, it was clear that the system was broken. A lot of people were afraid that speaking out would hurt their jobs or relationships. It was known to Thiokol's experts what was wrong, but the managers didn't want to be the ones to end the shuttle program. It was already too late when Thiokol finally pushed for a full rethink in 1985. It cost lives to keep quiet and hope for the best, and not just at Thiokol. It cost lives at NASA too. All of these issues would not have been fixed if Challenger had lived that morning. The mission was still going to happen. Christa McAuliffe would have taught her from space. A lot more people should have flown. Her backup, Barbara Morgan, might have gone after her. NASA would have stuck to its tight plan, and no one would have known how close they were to failing. But in the end, another shuttle might have exploded, which could have been even worse. A secret military mission was thought to have been lost by some. The loss of the Challenger was a wake-up call. It kept the danger secret until it killed even more people.